Welcome, Nancy, and thanks for joining me on the Legends of Recruiting conversation. And after spending 25 years in recruiting, I'm doing this to have authentic and interesting conversations with some of my favorite recruiters over the years and to talk about trends, lessons learned, where things are going. And in my front row seat, I've found that often what's missing is the art of recruiting, that storytelling, the candidate experience, how you sell it as much as the tech. And I'm really honored to have Nancy Hungerford join us today, who is a true recruiting legend and inspiration over the years. You've had a journey from the early Microsoft days to Starbucks to Amazon to Redfin and even Remitly and their IPO. So many amazing brands and stories you've been part of. So that's why you're a legend. And say thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Paul, for thinking of me, and so kind of you to consider me in your legend cadre. And really looking forward to this conversation. So appreciate it.
You're in the circle of trust. So, well, maybe to kick us off, why don't you walk me through a few of your recruiting career highlights in the story? Like, what's the Nancy recruiting story?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think the common thread to the story is that I've had the opportunity and the joy of working with, consumer-led, strong culture-led, epic, iconic at different stages companies. And oftentimes the founder was present or came back, and all these things create really unique dynamics, which of course impacts how we think about the shape of the org and our role, right, in recruiting and how we build that company. So, briefly, I've had, as you mentioned, the opportunity to do, venture. I joined at Series D, 2X, two times, pre-post IPO, 1X, pre-IPO, 2X, actually, and Fortune 50, 4X. So I've seen, a full spectrum of differences and a lot of commonalities, which I find, really interesting. I've been the company's first talent leader, 2X, so two times, with a 0 to 1 build, meaning that there was really like nothing. It was very nascent, and
All
building that to
yours.
global scale. Yeah, so high velocity, hyper responsible growth, as I call it, digital natives, and within that also with some of these epic companies that you mentioned, they were epic before I joined, but really helping them with transformative milestones and pivots of different dimensions. So I've had accountability for full function spectrum, right? Acquisition, operations, executive and board hiring. When we think about the reflections and the near past, led through COVID, right? We didn't stop hiring during COVID or after COVID. And, really a memorable moment was being able to ring the bell along with my Remitly colleagues during COVID when we had our IPO. And reflecting back on, Remitly, it was such an historical time, Paul. I'll just call out that, in 4 years, my team and I helped in partnership with the business to really grow that market cap from 500 million to 9 billion,
Wow.
revenue from 150 million to 1 billion. Headcount 4X over 4 years, keep that in mind. And I had a team of three. I was one of the three when I joined. We grew our customer base 7X and geo expansion, across different global, communities and countries 3X. So a lot to reflect on, and really proud and had fun and major lessons learned through all of it.
What was a favorite moment, maybe in the Remitly story, when you're trying to ramp them up and maybe explain what Remitly does for those who don't know
Yeah.
what the business model is?
Yeah, yeah. Remitly is a digital native fintech company created with the mission to enable money transferring cross-border, initially built with immigrants in mind. Anybody can use the product. It's an app with some additional add-ons since it came out. But the founder has been in place as a CEO since the start, and it's been a very fast, always mission and really always about customer, which again is that common thread that I've had in every place I've worked. It's been a very customer first
Hmm.
culture.
That's great. That's how you pay your offshore admin as Remitly.
Ah, yeah. Well, keep
So,
in mind too, as we know, right, particularly in tech, our country has, supported lots of immigrants from other countries, right, to build technology here in the U.S. And so, a lot of those folks come here with dreams and wishes, and a lot of pressure also from their own home country, and they deliver, monetary
Mhm.
value back to their family and friends, back to their home country, and it's something that is not really understood for
Hmm.
those of us that are not immigrants and not first gen right here. And it's really an important, it's been a very important feature. And it sounds simple, like, oh, send money, because now we have like Venmo and things, but it's really hard. It's super hard, right? And if it was easy, it would be more present. But it's hard for a variety of reasons and for reasons it should be around security and compliance, because every country has different compliance
Mhm.
features here. Yeah.
And when you're from India and you get that developer job at Amazon, it's life-changing for your whole family back home. So I've seen that talking to many friends who've had that experience. So, well,
That's
well, come on, recruiting trends. I mean, you've had a front row seat to see a lot of trends. From your perspective, how has recruiting changed over the years? Is there any key insights or moments that come to mind?
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think about this a lot and have conversations like probably monthly about this. Not much has changed, right? And so I think about it like not much with the exception of, perhaps mobilizing, right? How we all mobilized during COVID. And of course, moving forward where we are today and looking forward ahead, there'll be seismic change. But I think that, experiences, outcomes, and scale aligned to business needs have always been front and center. And what I mean by that is those are themes that are what everyone's always trying to do best, are having conversations about and solving problems for, right? It sounds simple, but it's not always a simple answer. It's not always a light switch. I would say that functional models I've seen shift
Hmm.
a lot and repeat themselves a lot over the years. And I think we'll continue to see that, Paul, as we consider building companies with humans and agents, by humans and agents, right? I think we'll see some unique models that sort of get sussed out and maybe land and sort of toyed around with. I think, startups I'm seeing like are staying smaller longer, right? And perhaps maybe for their lifetime. And I bring that up because, as you know, TA is equally important, right, for startups as it is for, public companies and big tech. And that has impacts that we could talk about if you want. And as we know, right, or people close to us, big tech TA is not as big anymore from a human size. And I think we'll see that continue to reduce. And at the same time, we're seeing spikes of fractional and contract, demand, right, for talent acquisition. I think that will continue. I think it's like a safe lever for a lot of companies as they're trying to figure out right sizing, demand capacity, and the markets that everyone is trying to navigate right now, as well as this, administration. And lastly, and these are not the only things, but these are sort of like the things on my mind. I predicted this last year when I was speaking with somebody, and I'm seeing it play out. I'm not saying it's because I'm right. I'm just saying I've been so close to it. I've seen it. But seeing a lot of blending of functions that are within, I'll call it the people function sphere. And so we're seeing, I think companies trying to get a bang for their buck in having like two roles in one. So
Hmm.
this renaissance, this return to talent management and this somebody head of talent and head of HR ops, right? Or head of
Hmm.
talent and head of people. And it's not always a small company, right? These are, medium, even sometimes large size companies. And I think, companies are just trying to be conservative in all the right ways. It doesn't mean that it's, a successful mission for someone, but I'm seeing that, which sort of makes me think about, the journey people are having around being a specialist, versus a generalist and having the agility to like travel across department and even business, to people ops, are things that I'm seeing play out. I'm sure you are as well.
It's interesting you say that, how recruiting is the same in many ways. Like, what do you want? And how do we tell a story to inspire someone? And how do we have a great experience? And how do we make the great culture fit? All these things are the same, that we did back in the 90s. Gosh, back at Microsoft, I think when we first met 23 years ago,
Ah,
whatever.
yeah.
But so some of these things are the same, but the tech acceleration and efficiency I think is good, but there's parts where I get concerned about the human touch and the people side as we push to like good AI efficiencies or keywords, because everyone likes to push efficiency. But you mentioned the agent, so maybe a good time to ask about AI. Kind of how do you see AI affecting recruiting today, and where's it going, and what do you mean by agents? Just like how they would work with recruiters practically.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's a great, we could probably spend our whole time talking about that.
It's so interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think as we are all reading and learning, right, agent is the word that at the moment, right, that we're all using to differentiate. We have humans and then we have non-humans. Those non-humans are agents, right? Built by LLMs and people prompting and feeding those agents to be smart and smartest. And I think a few things. I think that we have been using AI in talent acquisition, right? For a while, actually. We haven't called it AI, and it may not be
Mhm.
as robust as where it's going in the very near future. But when we think about using, smart features that were plugged into, different technologies and tools, that is an early form of AI, right? We just weren't calling it that from the top of the funnel. I think in the next, few years, I see just a lot happening as all of us, are reading about and discussing too. But I think we'll continue to see sort of recruiters creating their own tools with their agents, right? Which I love. I love this almost return to creativity and craft, right, of the function, Paul. Whereas I remember when Boolean strings came out, the people watching may not know what that is.
Or LinkedIn. I
Yeah,
remember that was
yeah,
pre-LinkedIn.
yeah. My experience, yours predates LinkedIn, where you had to find people, right? And you had to do it in creative, human touch ways. And so I see this ability for creativity for recruiters to really stop and pause and think about, okay, what am I structuring? What do I want to accomplish? What do I need to learn? And I really like that for so many reasons. One in particular is it really drives a growth mindset for recruiters and really pauses them, right? If they're willing to take that pause to think strategically, because so often, right, everyone's just like moving and not really thinking strategically about what's next. And so I see that as a good outcome. Um, I could be wrong on everything I'm saying in this one in particular, but I think I said this last year to somebody. I think the ATS will become nascent and vestigial. I think when it came on the scene and I was working when that happened too, I would never say it was like mind blowing. And I have mixed feelings about it because I think a lot of recruiting teams just mapped their process to the ATS that they purchased, which created this
Mhm.
conveyor belt of reactive function. And there's lots of bad recruiters out there because of that. I don't want to criticize
Well,
them individually, but they were
yeah.
rewarded for like managing the system versus, okay, let's have the system, optimize, in ways that we want to see that happen. And so I think that's a downfall on the function. I really do. And I don't think the function's ever recovered from it. And I think, I don't say this in a bad way, but I think that we'll continue to see, TA teams downsize and become smaller for technological reasons and for, financial reasons. And, I can go into that. But when we think about that, we think about, the business conditions, right? Because we don't exist in a vacuum. We're there to enable business. And so, just a few things that I see are just this continued, market consolidation, right, on the business
Mhm.
in markets. As I mentioned earlier, maybe smaller startups, staying smaller, by way of human count. And I think we'll see less IPOs, which is sad, but I think that might happen.
Hmm.
And then we also see like this movement, and again, I could be wrong, but this like deep verticalization that we're seeing now, right? People are talking about workflows and how this app can help with workflows. And so this is very like deep, dedicated verticalization. I think we'll go broad again and then maybe deep again. And that second deep, I think will be managed more by people versus buying product, from those vendors. So I see this downsizing of vendors within this space. And there's so much I could add here, but I'll end with I hope I see a return to like liberal arts education and experiences. So long we've been looking right for very specific, computer fundamentals and those things. But when we think about where we're going with AI and where humans can stand out versus agents, it's really, world knowledge and being able to pull from history and, predict and those things. So I'm hoping that we'll be hiring right earlier, early career people with more liberal arts background, which I think is a benefit. Said by somebody with a liberal arts attendance.
Well, me too. We've had a conversation internally, just like how do you AI proof, if you can even do that, a role, and just thinking about how we need to be continually adding value on the storytelling and the strategy and things you can't just get with keyword search and admin functions. And you have to keep going upstream to be different, I guess. And so
Mhm.
speaking of like what makes you different, I mean, what separates like great recruiting from just average recruiting? And I was curious maybe to get like a scale number. Like when you're at Starbucks, I don't think people realize how many people you hire and just yeah. So maybe what separates the good from the great and maybe like a scale of Starbucks just to educate people what that looked like at the peak.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a few things, come to mind, right? And of course, as leaders, we look to hire, for these things when we hire our own team. But listen, I think great recruiting, needs to enable the right business outcomes, right? And working backwards from that, run your team, like have your team act like the business because it's not separate, like it is the
Hmm.
business. So it's just, we're a business enabler, right? And so often I've seen like it's like behind the scenes, it's behind HR. It's like no, like you're like act like the business and show up and perform like the business. And you need to have cred, Paul, right?
Mhm.
And so you need to have solid business acumen within the company that you're hiring for, as well as the marketplace. And of course, trusted business partnerships and communication. So if you don't have that cred, if you're not a trusted partner, you're not probably doing a great job, right? You may be
Mhm.
hiring, there may be transactional pieces, but you're not going to really stand out or differentiate yourself or help the company compete, in my opinion. So being, business partner first, and setting and delivering on expectations, with all the stakeholders in that marketplace, so candidates, hiring teams, and even your own team and self, and ensuring that you're delivering on that as stated. And, I think also, and I think a lot about this too, Paul, is having like a first principled approach versus an existing playbook that you're pulling off the shelf. So, so often I think we've all seen leaders across functions and including TA where, oh, we did this at X company. I'm going to like pull it off the shelf and put a new logo on it. It may work, but it really doesn't
Mhm.
always work. And that's because you want to build something and have an approach that's unique to that culture, that stage of company, right? And that time. And we can go into that if you want. But given that, and on that note,
Mhm.
having recruiting be very aware of what is the stage of the business that I'm hiring into, and how am I weaving that story to tell that story, right? And how is that coming through the whole process so that candidates can make their informed decision and we can make our informed decision. So and then two more things I'll add, and that is I think ability to write
Hmm.
and present that writing, because so often we're having to create proposals for a variety of things, but how you present that influence, right, and guide. And lastly, it's very demanding, right, in so many ways because you're on, you're dealing with different stakeholders and the public, and so being timely, energetic, and really knowing your customer, if you will, are just some key things. So yeah.
You mentioned writing that kind of made me think about the storytelling aspect of what we do.
Yeah.
And so I guess what role does storytelling play as a recruiter as you pitch the company mission and culture and maybe how that may actually flow into like a job description or what's said in the candidate experience that helps you stand out to win someone to consider working for you?
Yeah, I mean, storytelling is foundational,
Mm.
and it really needs to show up right consistently, on and offline during the whole hiring process, and even when you're not hiring, because your content is found, right?
Mhm.
And it really needs to, in my opinion, convey the get, right? The quote unquote get. In other words, if I'm a candidate, if I give you my commitment, right, what do I get in return? Like, what is that day in the life? And what is quote unquote the promise, right? So it really expresses the culture, which I believe, is really behaviors and values. So it's helping
Hmm.
to add candidate decision data inputs, right? Do I want to opt in or opt out? And hopefully the story, right, that gets woven with those elements is consistent, right? No matter where they are in the process, no matter if they're looking on a company website, at Glassdoor, meeting with the interviewers, that there's a consistency versus inconsistency is key.
Hmm.
Um, and one thing I have learned works, and I enjoy doing it, is when I meet with a candidate, I always start, of course, with an introduction, but I start with a brief intro of my story and why I joined that particular
Hmm.
company and what my experience was like transitioning from, for example, leaving a public, Fortune 50 company or big tech to a
Hmm.
startup and what I had learned. And I share that knowing, of course, that person's background, so I can alter the story a little bit, staying authentic, right? So this might be a candidate who's looking at a startup for the first time. So I will talk about my first time startup experience,
Hmm.
the good, the bad, and the challenging, because I really want it to be authentic, and people, really need to understand. I don't believe in we're selling and pitching just to get a yes, to an offer. That's not a win, in my opinion. The win is this is the right decision for this candidate. This is a life-changing decision, as well as the right decision for the business. And when it's not, it could be disastrous. I mean, disastrous, Paul, right?
Hmm.
And so I really see talent as a Sherpa, right, through all of that. And that story is not. It's not a infomercial, right? This is like your chance to really express, the reality of the opportunity.
I love what you said that our role as recruiters is a guide, a Sherpa in the process, and we're, showing promises, that you and people can choose to opt in or opt out, and not everyone's a fit for the company or the role. And I think that's people miss that. Like part of our job is to help people opt out if it's not a fit to save everyone time. And I really like what you said about that. And also, I really want to double click on the authentic piece. There's something that I found in recruiting called mirroring. Like, if I'm vulnerable as a recruiter and very transparent about the good, bad, and challenges and the personal journey I've been on, people just naturally want to mirror that and then share their own journey and their own heart and fears, hopes, dreams. And so I think leading by example in that gives the company a personality. It's not just this rote checkbox engine behavioral interview flow. You feel like it's a robot. It's much more of a conversation because people work for people. And if you are calling on behalf of Starbucks, they think of you. They don't know everyone else. They don't know Howard. And so I think that's whether fair or not, they'll judge what it's like to work for the company by the recruiting experience. And so I think that's really important. Um, so what else from a candidate experience have you learned works? I guess what are some your tricks on, ooh, this candidate experience wows along the way has really been effective for you?
Yeah. Well, I think what works is just backing up and getting to your hiring process, and being prepared. And what I mean by that is really being able to orchestrate what's going to happen, right? Once you know what you're looking for, and maybe we need to back up even further. Be clear and aligned, right, with your hiring manager, with the hiring team on what are we looking for, or are we clear that we don't know and we're going to learn along the way? Like that happens often too, but having that alignment on the front end is so key, Paul, because as everything plays out, right, and as we embed the story and as people make decisions, it's all gonna pop up. But being prepared and having what I call a pre-brief, which is a meeting with the hiring team, and you may even have to help the hiring manager assemble the hiring team for all the right
Mhm.
reasons sometimes, right? And getting everybody in a room. This is before hiring starts, before we talk to candidates to say, this is what we are looking for, or we think we're looking for. This is the spec. This is how we think about you contributing and the focus areas that you'll have. What questions, concerns do you have? What do you think could make this even better? And having a conversation then versus later, but also having it later, right? Having a debrief as well after the interview and having just that real-time collective discussion, I think eliminates a lot of barriers that come up that a lot of recruiting teams and organizations are challenged with constantly. And until you have that, you really can't delimit that because that shouldn't be, you shouldn't be your own internal challenge, right? When we're trying to hire. So it's really about getting that out of the way, and then hopping over to the candidate side. Again, this is about letting them decide if they want to opt in or opt out, but really being able to listen and learn and build that rapport with the candidate. So I always emphasize with the hiring teams that, hey, like no more than 3 or 4 interview questions, and this is what they are, right? And leave like no less than 15 minutes for them to ask questions, right? So
Hmm.
often, I think we've heard stories, right? And I've seen it firsthand where the interviewer is so proud, they get out all they're documenting out all their questions, and they have 5 minutes left. Okay, candidate, go. What questions do you have? And they're like, checking their watch, and that's not enough time getting back to letting the candidate decide, right? It's not enough time, and it's not going to feel good. So being prepared, dedicating the time, having the conversations, and again, knowing what I call KYC, which is a common business term, but knowing your customer, which I mean the candidate, right? In this instance, what's important to them, right?
Hmm.
And what's this experience you're going to set up? So it's not that difficult, right? Once you have those pieces like landed. I'm not saying things go off without a hitch, but you can always come back then to things and moderate and measure and some lessons learned along there.
I like how you brought up the hiring manager aspect because we often talk about the candidate, like how do we inspire them and woo them and have a great experience, but it's a two-sided marketplace. We need to manage the hiring manager or the hiring team and their emotions and egos and perceptions and fears along the way too. I guess what have you learned works well? I guess to have the hiring managers aligned and help you close the person you want, because sometimes that's the biggest challenge I found.
Yeah. Yeah, it happens. It happens often. Yeah, so um, a couple of things, and it depends on maybe upon the altitude of the candidate and how timely we need to be. But I've scheduled ad hoc meetings with the hiring team to say, hey, like new finding, new feedback from the candidate. We have, we're at task here. Like we want to, answer some questions or sell, and so. I have assigned maybe one person to go a little bit deeper or be available for 30 minutes to answer questions or actually have lunch or dinner, right, with that
Mhm.
candidate, depending upon what the candidate was curious about. Maybe they wanted to know more about a product technology. I also have ensured that the hiring manager spends quality time. That could be a dinner, with the candidate. Again, depending upon what the candidate's needs are and what their questions are, or what their concerns are. But being able to quickly assemble a plan of action around that, and it doesn't take a lot, Paul, right? Sometimes it's meeting again in person, hopping on a call, flying out. I've even had our CEO at a previous company who was traveling all the time, being willing to fly out. Okay, San Francisco, I'm there for a meeting. Happy to go meet with this person after my meeting. And that's worked incredibly well. Like they weren't even, thinking they were going to meet the CEO, and here we are. So I think it really depends. It's situational, but I've seen that work out well. I've also seen us coming to the table to maybe make some concessions based upon a candidate's situation. And what I mean by that is um, maybe there's something personal in their
Mhm.
right life that was preventative from them moving forward, and they needed more time or time out or just more freedom with their calendar. And I've seen us come to the table to acknowledge that and understand that and support that and make those concessions, right? And then check in again. And that has meant a lot in those instances, particularly coming out of COVID. As we think about it, we had lots of candidates that had um, uh, generational, folks in the house. So they were taking care of their parents. They have their own children, and getting through COVID was really tough. And we didn't stop hiring during COVID, so we were still hiring, but being able to have that empathetic lens and accommodate, what was needed
Mhm.
has
Well,
also helped.
well, two good outcomes of COVID were QR codes and video interviews. I love video interviews now. It's way more efficient.
Yeah.
And prior to COVID, it was the weird link that no one knew how to use, and it was fumbling around. But now
Right.
it's so bizarre. If someone doesn't understand how do you do a video interview, they're not a candidate. Um, and so that's interesting. Well, Why do you love it? I mean, after all these years, I mean, you're a smart person, you're driven, you have great business sense. What's kept you in recruiting all these years and inspired?
Yeah, and I do love it. Listen, it transforms lives, business, and history, which I find, positively powerful, Paul. I'm sure you do too. It also lends itself to growth mindset, right? So there is no end to being curious about your own business and about external markets and having a pulse on things and running parallel to that, evolving and building relationships. So with folks internally and externally. So it's this cadre of interesting aspects, and some of it is, on and public. Some of it's more quiet and strategic and thinking. And I love the blend of that and being able to have the creativity of when and how. Also, there's this, rhythm, right? And adaptability that's always needed. So there's a pace and timing is key, even now, even in this market. And I do like to move quickly, not without thought and preparedness, but there is a rhythm, and you're also, guiding, the business through that rhythm, and particularly now, right, for all of us, I am so curious about AI today, and how it will evolve, right, our functions. Some of the things we're seeing play out, some of the things are speculative, but maybe not off the table. So, yeah, the creativity here is going to be endless, in my opinion, moving forward.
Yeah, it is being a recruiter. What kept me engaged all these years, the intellectual curiosity to learn new businesses and is this puzzle to solve, like this culture, this problem. And even though you fill dozens of heads of marketing or CFOs, like everyone's unique and different. And I think that's an intellectual challenge. I find and just find that interesting. And yeah, you are helping build a business. You're helping someone win, and it's a major life change for someone to make a job change. It's not like switching
Agree.
cell phone plans or swapping a car out. This is a big move with their community, their friends, money. It could be where they
Yeah,
live. There's so many ways this affects them that it's a major change we're walking them through. And so I think so we get a chance to be a front row seat to help them in that process. Um,
100%.
so what's like a favorite interview question that you like to ask Nancy?
Yeah, I have so many, Paul. But one go-to and something I ask, every candidate has been, what is the hardest thing that you accomplished in the last 6 to 12 months? And why was it hard? What did you do? What would you have done differently? And I never say, hey, it could be personal, professional. Let them decide how they want to sort of draw from that, which I think is interesting too. But I think what I get back from that, what the hiring team gets to see and learn is how they structure their thoughts. How do they define hard?
Mhm,
Um, how do they deal with challenges that they had or had not anticipated? How do they approach decision making, right, around that and solutioning? And what's their self-reflection, right? And what I mean by that is their growth mindset, which I
mhm,
think is just so important all the time. And aside from that, I think it just allows you to build rapport, right? Because people may not always expect that question. And I'm not trying to trick anyone.
mhm,
I'm just trying to get connected, to really who somebody is and how they think and move, if you will. And when people share, personal things like that, it does lend itself to building this rapport and trust.
mhm. And I found sometimes the stories candidates will share, maybe they got into beekeeping or a house remodel, or it could be some travel adventure. Like sometimes those personal stories and discipline and just competitiveness translates into work. I think I find that's something I look for in their personal life does flow into work, not the other way around. And so hearing some
Yeah.
of those personal stories and journeys, I share more insight into who they are and how they tick. And but you can tell when someone lights up. And that's the fun thing about that question is you get a chance to talk about how they had a hard challenge and they won. And so this should be a chance to share something great. If someone says, I don't have anything hard to share, it's like, well, thanks for
Yeah. That's
talking.
happened. I've had that happen. Yeah.
So, uh, what's a culture fit? That's a term we use a lot in recruiting, which I think can be just a professional way to say I didn't like them. But so what does culture fit really mean? to you as a recruiter, and how do you practically screen for that?
Yeah. I was just discussing this yesterday with somebody. It came up in conversation. Um, I dislike the word fit, and I prefer to use the word aligned. And I have
Mhm.
introduced that to businesses that I've worked with, just for maybe obvious reasons. But um, the culture is expressed by employees, right? It's their behaviors, and hopefully they align with the cultural values of the company. But when we think about, a particular company's culture, maybe they have values. If they're far along, maybe they don't. But really, what it means is being able to understand somebody and assess and
Mhm.
hire them in a way that they're a complement to the values that we have, and the values complement who they are, or those behaviors, right? And so, those can be woven into, an interview assessment, right? Which I've done, and it works really well, Paul, being able to have interviewers on point for different functional areas, right? Different focus areas, and also tossing in a cultural value. And we've had in two places I've worked, maybe three interview bank questions, if you will, right? That
Mhm.
interviewers can choose from based on a value and what some of those questions look like underneath that ladder up to that value. And so again, those values are expected behaviors and performance, right? So having conversations about them become key. Something that has worked really well has actually been asking candidates to reflect on our cultural values, right, based on the company, right, they're interviewing with, and asking them, which ones excite them and bring them joy, which ones sort of do they not get to touch, if you will, or have exposure to, or that they want to develop. And those are very similar questions that are asked of employees, during performance review, like, where do you show up strong? What are your top cultural values that you show up strong?
Mhm.
Which ones are you developing? So again, to your point earlier, getting people to really think and choose and light up. Maybe they're really activated by integrity, right? Which could be a
Mhm.
value company, and driving results, and being able for them to self-express that. But it's very key, and that's how I think about what it means, and how you assess for that alignment.
Do you have a question you like to ask that's kind of the BS meter or truth serum? Because everyone's kind of sharing their best self and trying to sell you, and some people are really good at it, and you find out they're horrible to work with, but so I guess, is there a litmus test question you like to ask that has helped you over the years?
Yeah, I think just broadly, and this could work depending on any company and what the values are, but just asking them to, and I've done this before too, in advance of their interviews, like, hey, here are our cultural values, and be prepared to like think about them and how you've navigated different situations where they align. And just asking them to highlight one, like
Hmm.
where is one of our values, which one would you say you're drawn to? Where have you shown up high? Where have you maybe fallen short, relative to that value? And give us some examples. And it's a big question actually. And again, it allows you to see where they go with their story, and it's very self-reflective because you have to really stop and think. It's not tell me about a time you had to code X. This is really like, oh, like how did I show up, and where have I expressed that, and where have I
Hmm.
role modeled that or taught that, right? And so again, just giving people the freedom, right, to explore and pick and choose and express, I think gets at the true authentic them,
Mhm.
as we are representing our authentic self and trying to mash those two up, if you will, in a complementary way.
What do you feel is the greatest misperception of recruiting inside companies, like this recruiting department? I have my recruiters. What do you feel is the misperception? And if you could wave a wand, how would you fix it?
The misperception, yeah, I think one is that recruiting is not doing anything is a common misperception, or that recruiting is misunderstood. And I've seen this play out actually everywhere I worked, when I joined, not really understanding hiring, and when the business doesn't understand hiring or recruiting, or they're not comfortable with it, they're also not very comfortable with the function. And if you don't have a very sort of confident recruiting leader team, if they're not clear on their role and guiding and speaking truth to power, and you have a business that's not comfortable or hiring manager not comfortable hiring, it's not going to be a strong relationship and outcome, right? It's going to be just sort of reactive and no one's really leading, or eventually the business will step up because they have to get something done. That's sort of like what I see. Uh, if I could, wave a wand, I think a lot about how we measure, right? Measure, recruiting and, how does recruiting win? I just again think a lot about how do we again show up like the business? How do we use data to explain the
Mhm.
function? And listen, hiring is a team sport, right? It's not owned by talent acquisition. But unless you can paint that picture and illuminate that and lead the business to understand that, they won't see it that way. They see it as, well, you brought me a bad person and we hired a bad person. It's like, well, no, that was your decision. But you have to really like tell that story internally of hiring. We didn't really talk about that, but there's an internal story often that
Mm.
needs to be told and landed or vetted. And again, hopefully it aligns with the company's cultural values of okay, like what are our expectations here and how are we going to do this and what's going to work for us? And back to that first principled approach. But um, again, just building that rapport and having, that feedback mechanism that goes both ways and with the candidates, right? It's a three-way feedback marketplace. I think is starting point when I think about waving the wand and being able to have the team come together, right? Because TA
Mhm.
is a player and a coach, in my opinion,
Mhm.
but they don't always show up that way.
So, last question, and I really appreciate this time. How would you describe what the art of recruiting is to a CEO and why it matters?
Yeah. Well, listen, hiring decisions are the most critical decisions a CEO will make, and they need to be measured both quantitatively and qualitatively. And so, with the right process, with the right hiring team, and trust along the way, you can get there. So, yeah.
That's good. Well, Nancy, thank you so much for this time together. It's great reconnecting. You have such wisdom on recruiting over the years and such scale and complexity you've overseen. So thank you. I mean, you take complicated things and make it sound simple, but I know that's why you're good at what you do.
Well, thank you, Paul. I'm back at you. It's been great to reconnect, and I enjoyed our time. Looking forward to our next conversation.
All right, cheers.